John sat at his desk, staring blankly at the pile of unfinished work in front of him. His mind was racing with frustration. Why does this always happen to me? No matter how hard he tried, it seemed like the universe had a way of sabotaging his efforts. Every time he felt like he was moving forward, something inevitably pulled him back. He felt stuck in a cycle he couldn't escape. But was it really just bad luck, or something deeper? As he reflected, his phone buzzed with a message from Rachel, his colleague and closest friend. "You ever notice how you keep ending up in the same situations?" she asked. John frowned at the screen. He hadn't told her about his recent struggles, but she always seemed to sense when something was wrong. Could she be right? He felt a strange curiosity building inside him, wondering if there was an answer he had overlooked. The next day, over coffee, Rachel brought up the topic again. "I've been thinking, John, what if the problems you keep facing aren't just random?" she said, her voice calm but insistent. "What if there's a reason behind it all?" John looked at her, confused. "What do you mean? Life's just life. Things happen." Rachel smiled softly, leaning forward. "But what if it's karma? What if you're being presented with the same challenges because there's a lesson you haven't learned yet?" Karma. The word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. John had heard it before, but he had never given it much thought. To him, karma was just something people said when bad things happened to bad people. "You think my life is stuck in a loop because of karma?" he asked, half joking. But Rachel's serious expression made him pause. "I think there's more to it than we realize," she replied. "Maybe it's time to look deeper." Intrigued, John found himself unable to stop thinking about Rachel's words. Could it be true? Could there really be something behind the constant setbacks he faced? He had always considered himself rational, but the idea of karma tugged at something inside him. That evening, he found himself scrolling through articles on karma, reading about how it shapes our lives in ways we don't always understand. Was there really something he was missing? Rachel, noticing his curiosity, decided to push him further. "I've been reading a lot about karmic numbers," she said, showing him a book she had brought. "Based on your birth date, you can calculate your personal karmic number. It reveals the challenges and lessons you're supposed to learn in this life." John raised an eyebrow. "My birth date can tell me all that?" Rachel nodded, smiling. "More than you think. Let's do yours." Skepticism lingered in John's mind, but he couldn't deny his growing curiosity. Rachel grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. "What's your birthday?" she asked. John told her, and she quickly began the calculations. "Okay, here we go," Rachel said, circling a number on the paper. "Your karmic number is 6. John stared at the number. "And what does that mean?" Rachel smiled knowingly. "It's about finding balance between responsibility, love, and self-care." John leaned back in his chair, taking in Rachel's words. Balance? He thought back to his life, how he constantly put others first, leaving little for himself. It made sense in a way he hadn't expected. Rachel's words echoed in his mind. "You're always helping others, John. But if you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to truly help anyone." A new thought began to form in his mind. Could this be what's been holding me back all along? The realization hit him harder than he expected. John had spent years taking on the weight of everyone else's problems, believing it was his duty. But now, it seemed clear. Maybe the lesson karma had been trying to teach him wasn't about working harder or being stronger. Maybe it was about learning to say no. As he sat there, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. For the first time, he felt like he was starting to understand. John couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel was right. Over the next few days, he began reflecting on his life. Every challenge, every failure, it all started to make sense. He realized how much time he had spent taking care of others. Whether it was friends, family, or colleagues, he was always the one to step up, sacrificing his own needs. It felt noble at first, but now he saw how drained and empty he had become. Was this the lesson karma wanted him to learn? He recalled moments when he ignored his own boundaries, saying yes when every part of him screamed no. He remembered times when he felt used, but still pushed forward, thinking it was his duty to help. The patterns were undeniable. How many times had he helped someone out of trouble, only to find himself in a worse position afterward? The idea of karmic lessons played in his mind like a movie on repeat. Could balance truly be the key? Rachel's words echoed as he pondered. Karma isn't about punishment, it's about teaching. That made sense to him now. The universe wasn't conspiring against him, but guiding him, showing him the areas of his life that needed attention. John felt both relieved and frustrated. How could he have been so blind to the lessons unfolding before him? He had been fighting the same battle over and over without realizing it, but now, with this newfound awareness, things could change. The next time he met with Rachel, John felt a shift in his perspective. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her, sitting down at their usual cafe. "About karma and balance. Maybe you're right?" Rachel smiled knowingly, stirring her coffee. "It's not just about being right, John. It's about recognizing the patterns and deciding to do something different." John nodded. "I just don't know where to start. How do you even begin to break a karmic cycle?" Rachel leaned forward, her eyes full of warmth and understanding. "You start by setting boundaries," she said. "You've been giving so much of yourself to others that you've forgotten to take care of yourself. Karma is asking you to find balance between helping others and helping yourself." John sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It sounds so simple, but it's harder than it looks." Rachel chuckled softly. "Of course, it's hard, but the hardest things are usually the most rewarding." John took her words to heart, but change didn't come easily. The very next day, his boss asked him to stay late for a project that wasn't his responsibility. His instinct was to say yes, as always, but Rachel's voice echoed in his mind. Boundaries. For the first time, John hesitated. "Actually, I have plans tonight," he said, his voice steady but unsure. His boss seemed surprised but didn't argue. "All right, no problem, we'll handle it." John hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of guilt and empowerment. That night, he sat at home, reflecting on what had just happened. For years, he had sacrificed his time for work, believing it was his responsibility. Saying no felt foreign, almost wrong, but there was also a sense of liberation. For once, he had chosen himself. It wasn't about being selfish, he realized. It was about self-preservation. John knew this was just the beginning. The road to balance and breaking karmic cycles would be long, but for the first time, he felt ready. Over the following weeks, John began practicing saying no more often. It was difficult, especially with people who had grown accustomed to his constant availability. Some took it personally, while others didn't seem to notice. But with each small boundary he set, he felt a little lighter. He wasn't carrying everyone else's burdens anymore. Rachel noticed the change in him too. "You're learning to balance, John," she said one afternoon. "That's what karma is all about, learning and evolving." Rachel sat across from John, a notebook open between them. The dim light of the cafe created a cozy atmosphere, but the intensity of their conversation was anything but casual. "All right, John," Rachel began, "let's talk about your karmic number. It's not just a random concept, it's a blueprint of your soul's journey in this life." John leaned in, intrigued but skeptical. "How does a number have anything to do with my karma?" he asked. Rachel smiled. "Let's calculate yours, and you'll see." She pulled out a pen. "First, we start with your date of birth." John watched as she wrote it down, July 15, 1990. "We'll break this down into 3 parts. The day, the month, and the year. You add them together until you get a single digit." Rachel continued. "For your birthday, which is 15, we add the digits, 1 plus 5. That gives us 6. John nodded, starting to follow. "Next, the month. July is the 7th month, so the number for that is simply 7. Rachel scribbled down the next number. "Now the tricky part. Your year, 1990. We add each digit, 1 plus 9 plus 0. That gives us 19. Since 19 is still a 2-digit number, we add those digits together. 1 plus 9 equals 10, and finally, 1 plus 0 gives us 1. So my numbers are 6 for the day, 7 for the month, and 1 for the year?" John asked, raising an eyebrow. Rachel nodded. "Exactly. Now we add those together. 6 plus 7 plus 1 equals 14. But since 14 is still a double digit, we simplify it further. 1 plus 4 equals 5. She tapped the notebook. "Your karmic number is 5. John looked at the number, unsure what it meant. "Okay, so I'm a 5. But what does that even mean?" Rachel smiled again, knowing this was where things would get interesting. Each karmic number from 1 to 9 has a specific meaning. Your number 5 is all about change, freedom, and adaptability. People with a karmic number of 5 are here to learn how to embrace change without fear. John frowned. That actually makes sense. I've always felt stuck, like I'm resisting change, even though it keeps happening anyway. Rachel nodded knowingly. Exactly. The more you resist, the more stuck you'll feel. Karma isn't about punishment. It's about learning. And for you, change is your greatest teacher. But before we dive deeper into your karmic number, let's explore what each number means. Rachel began explaining the karmic numbers, weaving them into their conversation. Karmic number 1. If your karmic number is 1, your lesson is leadership. People with this number often feel the need to stand out, to lead, but they must learn to balance their independence with collaboration. The challenge for number 1s is to avoid pride and isolation. Karmic number 2. For number 2, the journey is about cooperation and balance. They are natural mediators, but their lesson is learning to value their own needs as much as others. The challenge? Overcoming fear of rejection and finding strength in vulnerability. Karmic number 3. Number 3s are creative communicators. They bring joy and expression into the world, but their challenge is discipline, seeing their projects through. They need to balance creativity with action to avoid scattering their energy. Karmic number 4. People with a 4 are the builders. Stability and security are everything to them, but they can become too rigid. Their lesson is to learn flexibility while maintaining the structure they value. Karmic number 5. Like I said, number 5 is about embracing freedom and change. You'll need to learn that true freedom isn't running from responsibility, but balancing it with adventure. Karmic number 6. Number 6 is about responsibility and service. They're the nurturers, but their challenge is to avoid perfectionism and overextending themselves. They must learn that self-care is just as important as caring for others. Karmic number 7. 7s are the seekers of wisdom. They search for deep spiritual truths, but must learn to balance the inner journey with connecting to the outer world. They can sometimes become too isolated in their quest for knowledge. Karmic number 8. 8s are about power and success. They're ambitious and often achieve great things, but their challenge is learning to use their power wisely and not get too caught up in material success. Karmic number 9. 9s are humanitarians. They are here to serve others and make the world better, but their lesson is learning to set boundaries and not carry the weight of the world on their shoulders. John listened, his mind racing as he thought about the significance of each number. So, each of these numbers points to a different kind of life challenge or lesson? He asked. Rachel nodded. Exactly. Your karmic number tells you what you're here to work on, but it's not a fixed destiny. It's more like a guide, helping you understand why certain patterns keep repeating in your life. For John, this new knowledge was like opening a door to a deeper understanding of himself. His karmic number wasn't just a number. It was a key to unlocking the lessons he needed to learn in this lifetime. So what do I do with this? He asked quietly, staring down at the number 5. Rachel gave him a reassuring smile. You start by accepting it. Then you live consciously, knowing that every change, every challenge is here to teach you something. John nodded, the weight of this new understanding settling over him. His journey with karma had only just begun. John spent the next few days reflecting on what Rachel had taught him. The idea that his karmic number held clues to his spiritual path was something he couldn't shake. Number 5, representing freedom and change, seemed to hit him directly where it hurt. He had always struggled with the fear of uncertainty. Now it was clear why. He wasn't just supposed to endure change. He was supposed to embrace it. His first real test came quickly. His company announced a major restructuring, and John's department was one of the ones targeted for layoffs. Normally, this kind of news would have sent him spiraling into anxiety, but now something was different. He remembered what Rachel had said about his karmic number. Change is your greatest teacher, she had told him. The words echoed in his mind as he sat at his desk, staring at the email. What am I supposed to learn from this? John muttered to himself. Was he supposed to quit and start over? Or should he wait to see what happened next? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he decided to do something he had never done before. Trust the process. Instead of jumping into action, he decided to meditate on it, letting go of his instinct to control everything. He had no idea what the outcome would be, but somehow that was the point. Rachel had said that every karmic number came with its own set of lessons. For number 1, it was learning to lead without becoming isolated. For number 2, it was about finding balance between their needs and others. And for John, his challenge was learning to be free from fear, free from rigid thinking, and most of all, free from the need to predict every outcome. He knew now that the changes around him weren't happening to him, they were happening for him. A few days later, his company made the final announcements. His department had been spared, but his role was being expanded. Instead of being relieved, John felt anxious. The new responsibilities felt overwhelming, and the idea of having to learn new skills threw him off. He wasn't ready for this kind of change, but maybe that was exactly the lesson his karmic number had been pointing him toward. It wasn't just about accepting change, it was about thriving in it. Over coffee that evening, John told Rachel about his fears. "I'm terrified of failing," he admitted. "This new role feels too big for me." Rachel listened quietly before responding. "You know, people with karmic number 3 often feel like that too. Their lesson is about expressing themselves without fear, finding balance between creativity and responsibility. But it's not just about doing the work, it's about showing up with confidence. That's the real challenge." John looked at her, thoughtful. "So, you're saying I need to believe that I can handle this?" Rachel nodded. "Exactly. You've been given this opportunity because the universe knows you're ready, even if you don't feel like you are. The more you resist, the harder it gets. Embrace it. Find your rhythm in the chaos." It was strange, but the more she talked, the more John felt his anxiety lifting. Maybe this wasn't about the job at all. Maybe this was about him. The next week was a whirlwind. John was thrown into new projects, unfamiliar tasks, and unexpected challenges. It felt like every day was a new test of his flexibility. But instead of panicking, he started to trust his instincts. He realized that, as someone with a karmic number of 5, he was uniquely equipped to navigate change, even if it scared him. The more he leaned into his adaptability, the more confident he became. During one particularly stressful meeting, John found himself staying calm while others around him were losing their patience. He noticed something in that moment. The more he surrendered to the flow of change, the more grounded he felt. Maybe this was what Rachel had meant all along. Freedom wasn't about escaping the situation, it was about finding peace within it. His karmic number was teaching him how to do just that. By the end of the month, John felt a shift, not just in his work life, but in how he approached everything. His relationships, his goals, even his day-to-day routine seemed to reflect this new understanding of change and freedom. It wasn't easy, but he was learning. And every step he took toward embracing the unknown felt like a victory. No matter how small, he realized that karma wasn't about avoiding challenges. It was about embracing them and allowing them to shape him into the person he was meant to be. John's newfound understanding of his karmic number began to spill over into other areas of his life, especially his relationships. He had always been someone who tried to hold things together, even when they were falling apart. Whether it was with friends or romantic partners, he hated the thought of letting go. But now, he was starting to see things differently. Maybe holding on too tightly was the very thing that was keeping him stuck. One afternoon, while talking to Rachel, he brought this up. "I've always felt like if I didn't fight to keep my relationships, I'd end up alone," he admitted. Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "That's something a lot of people with karmic number 6 struggle with," she said. "Their challenge is learning to balance caring for others without losing themselves. You've always cared deeply about the people in your life, but sometimes caring too much can become a burden." John considered her words. He had always thought of himself as a loyal friend, but now he wondered if that loyalty had turned into something else. Fear. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being alone. Rachel continued, "Your karmic number 5 is all about learning to let go of those fears. Relationships change, just like everything else. The more you try to hold on to something that's no longer working, the more it slips away." It wasn't long before John's lessons were put to the test. An old friend, someone he had known for years, suddenly began pulling away. John's first instinct was to chase after them, to try and fix whatever was wrong. But then he remembered what he had learned about his karmic number. Change was inevitable. Instead of fighting to keep the friendship exactly as it had been, he decided to let it evolve, or even end, if that's what was meant to happen. To his surprise, the moment he stopped clinging, something shifted. His friend reached out, apologizing for the distance, and explaining they had been going through their own struggles. John realized that by letting go of his fear, he had given both of them space to breathe. The friendship wasn't over. It was just changing. Like everything else in life. Rachel had explained to him that people with karmic number 2 often struggle with this as well. Their challenge is to find balance in relationships, learning to value themselves as much as they value others. For John, the lesson was about finding freedom within those connections. Freedom to let people come and go as they needed, without feeling like he had to control the outcome. His romantic life also began to shift. For years, John had been stuck in a cycle of relationships that never seemed to last. He was always looking for something, or someone, to complete him. But now, with his new understanding of karma, he realized that maybe he had been looking for the wrong thing. Instead of searching for someone to fill the gaps in his life, maybe he needed to focus on embracing the changes within himself first. As he continued to navigate these shifts, John felt a growing sense of peace. The more he let go of his need for control, the more things seemed to fall into place. He wasn't chasing after relationships anymore. Instead, he was allowing them to unfold naturally, trusting that the right people would stay in his life, and that those who didn't were part of the lesson. At a dinner with Rachel, he shared his realizations. I used to think that if I didn't fight for everything, I'd lose it all. But now I see that sometimes the best thing I can do is let go. Rachel smiled. That's the power of understanding your karmic number. It shows you the patterns you've been stuck in and gives you the tools to break free. John nodded, feeling lighter than he had in years. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of what might come next. Whether it was in his career, his friendships, or his love life, he was finally learning to embrace the changes, knowing that each shift brought him one step closer to understanding himself and his karma. John found himself facing yet another karmic test, this time at work. After surviving the layoffs, he was promoted to a new role, one with more responsibility than he had ever expected. His initial reaction was excitement, but as the days went on, the reality of his situation began to set in. The new role demanded more of him, and it felt like the weight of the entire team rested on his shoulders. Rachel's words echoed in his mind. Change is your teacher. He knew this, but the fear of failure was creeping in. Was he really ready to take on this challenge? What if I mess it all up? He asked Rachel during one of their conversations. She smiled knowingly. That's the same challenge faced by people with karmic number 8. They're meant to lead, but they often struggle with balancing their ambition and the pressure that comes with success. John sighed. So what's the lesson for me? Rachel leaned forward. Your karmic number 5 is about learning to navigate change with confidence. You're not here to be perfect. You're here to grow. Just like the karmic number 4 needs to balance security with flexibility, you need to balance your fear of change with trust in yourself. As John navigated his new role, he realized that every day felt like a test of his ability to adapt. His team relied on him for decisions, and while the pressure was intense, something surprising happened. The more he embraced the unpredictability of his job, the more capable he felt. He wasn't just learning how to do the job, he was learning how to trust his instincts. One afternoon, his boss called him into the office. John braced himself, wondering if he had made a mistake somewhere. But instead of criticism, he received praise. You've been handling the transition incredibly well, his boss said. Your ability to stay calm under pressure is exactly what we need. John felt a wave of relief, but also a deep sense of satisfaction. Maybe this was what his karmic number had been teaching him all along. Change wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. He was starting to see that with every new challenge, there was an opportunity for growth. Later that evening, Rachel reminded him of another important lesson. People with karmic number 7 often get caught up in overthinking and spiritual searching, but they forget to trust the process of life. You're learning to do that now. By embracing the unknown, you're finding your strength. As the weeks went on, John noticed that his relationship with change was evolving. It wasn't that the challenges went away. If anything, they grew more complex. But with each new project, he felt more grounded. He was learning to move with the current of life instead of fighting against it. His karmic number was shaping him into someone who could thrive in the midst of uncertainty. John's journey wasn't limited to work and friendships. His family relationships were also undergoing a transformation. He had always had a complicated relationship with his father. Growing up, his father had been strict, focused on discipline and order, always pushing John to succeed. But now, with his new understanding of karma, John saw their dynamic through a different lens. Rachel had mentioned that karmic number 6 was deeply tied to family responsibility and the need to balance giving with receiving. John wondered if part of his struggle with his father came from this same karmic lesson. Maybe I've been carrying the weight of expectations for too long, he reflected one evening. It's like I've been living someone else's dream instead of my own. Rachel nodded, offering her insight. That's a common challenge for number 6s. They want to please others so much that they forget to listen to themselves. But remember, your karmic number 5 is about freedom. You're here to learn how to break free from those old patterns, even if they're ingrained in family dynamics. Over the next few weeks, John began to approach his relationship with his father differently. Instead of reacting with frustration or defensiveness, he tried to see things from a broader perspective. His father had grown up in a different time, with different values, and perhaps his strictness was his way of showing love, even if it didn't always feel that way. One weekend, John decided to confront these issues head-on. He sat down with his father, not to argue, but to talk. Dad, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I've realized something. I've been holding on to a lot of resentment, thinking that you were trying to control me, but I understand now that you just wanted the best for me. His father looked surprised, but after a moment, he nodded. I never wanted to hold you back, John. I just wanted to make sure you had a secure future. For the first time in years, there was an opening, a space where understanding could flow between them. John realized that by releasing his need to hold on to old grievances, he was allowing room for healing. It was a lesson Rachel had shared from the karmic number 9. Forgiveness and the ability to let go of the past were essential for healing deep karmic wounds. The more John let go of his need to prove something, the more peace he felt in his family relationships. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about accepting the changes and moving forward. By the end of the conversation, John felt lighter. His father wasn't going to change overnight, but their relationship was evolving, just as he was. The more he embraced the freedom that came with letting go, the more open he became to new possibilities in all areas of his life. Just when John thought he had a handle on his karmic lessons, life threw another curveball. A project he had been leading at work suddenly fell apart. What had seemed like a surefire success unraveled in front of him, and for the first time in months, John felt the familiar weight of doubt creeping back in. Why does this keep happening to me? He asked Rachel in frustration. I thought I was learning, growing, changing. But now I feel like I'm right back where I started. Rachel didn't offer immediate comfort. Instead, she looked at him with a calm, knowing gaze. That's karma, she said softly. It's not linear. It's not a staircase you climb and never descend. Sometimes it loops back to test you in deeper ways. She paused before adding, have you considered that this setback is part of your karmic journey? You're being asked to revisit old wounds, but with new eyes. John sighed. His karmic number 5 was all about adapting to change. He knew that. But this didn't feel like change. It felt like failure. So what's the lesson here? He asked, almost bitterly. Rachel's response was gentle but firm. It's about resilience. Think of people with karmic number 4. They're meant to build foundations, but when those foundations crack, they have to learn how to rebuild without losing hope. Her words gave John something to think about. Maybe this wasn't just about failure. Maybe it was about learning how to stand tall, even when everything seemed to be crumbling. He remembered something Rachel had said weeks ago. Freedom isn't about escaping hardship, it's about finding your strength in the middle of it. The next few days were hard. John had to face the consequences of the project's collapse, explaining it to his boss and the team. But instead of retreating into self-blame or denial, he chose a different approach. He accepted responsibility, but he didn't internalize the failure as a reflection of his worth. This, he realized, was a new kind of freedom, the freedom to fail without being consumed by it. Rachel had once told him about the struggles of those with karmic number 3, the number of creativity and expression. They often wrestle with feelings of inadequacy when their creative projects don't meet their expectations. But the lesson for them and for John was about perseverance, the willingness to keep trying, to keep showing up, even when things didn't go as planned. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, John sat alone in his apartment, reflecting. He had lost count of how many times he had questioned his path over the last few months. But in that moment, something clicked. Maybe karma wasn't just about learning from challenges, it was about learning how to keep going despite them. I'm not here to be perfect, he thought to himself. I'm here to grow, even when it's messy. That realization brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in weeks. Karma wasn't punishing him, it was pushing him to evolve. And the more he embraced that truth, the more resilient he became. After months of navigating the ups and downs of his karmic journey, John began to notice a subtle shift. Life didn't feel as chaotic as it once had. The challenges were still there, work, relationships, personal doubts, but they no longer threw him off balance. He was learning to flow with life, rather than fight against it. This is what karmic freedom looks like, Rachel said one afternoon as they discussed his progress. It's not about avoiding obstacles, it's about dancing with them. John laughed at the metaphor, but he understood what she meant. His karmic number, 5, had been teaching him how to move through change without losing himself. It was a lesson that took time, patience, and countless mistakes to learn. But now, he felt more aligned with his true self than ever before. The more he embraced the unpredictable nature of life, the more he felt at peace. But life wasn't done testing him. Just when he thought he had found his rhythm, his company announced another major restructuring, this time with a clear message that layoffs were coming. The anxiety he had once felt began to resurface, but John knew this time would be different. This is what I've been preparing for, he reminded himself. I can handle this. Rachel had often spoken about how people with karmic number 7 struggled with trusting the unknown. They spent so much time seeking deeper truths that they sometimes forgot how to live in the moment. John saw echoes of that in himself. He had spent so long trying to control every aspect of his life that he had forgotten how to let go and trust the journey. As the restructuring unfolded, John found himself in the same position he had been months earlier, facing uncertainty. But instead of spiraling into panic, he embraced the flow. He prepared for every possibility, but he didn't let the fear consume him. Whatever happens, I'll adapt, he told himself. This time, he knew that the universe had a plan for him, even if he couldn't see it yet. The layoffs came, and to John's surprise, his position was eliminated. But instead of feeling devastated, he felt a strange sense of relief. The job had been a source of stress for a long time, and now he saw this as an opportunity, a karmic doorway opening to something new. He had learned to see the closing of one chapter as the beginning of another. Rachel reminded him of the lessons tied to karmic number 9, the number of completion and renewal. When one cycle ends, another begins. It's all part of the karmic flow. John smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude for everything he had experienced. Losing his job wasn't a failure. It was a chance to start again, with the wisdom he had gained along the way. In the days that followed, John began exploring new career opportunities, but this time, he approached everything with a calm heart. He no longer needed to control every outcome or predict every turn. He had learned to trust the ebb and flow of life, knowing that karma would continue to guide him, even in the most uncertain times. As he sat in meditation one evening, reflecting on his journey, John realized something profound. Life was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to be lived, fully, messily, and with an open heart. Karma wasn't a punishment or a reward, it was a teacher. And now, after months of soul-searching, he was finally ready to embrace the lessons it had to offer. As John's journey neared its next phase, he reflected on how far he had come. He had faced upheavals at work, challenges in his relationships, and moments of deep self-doubt. But what had shifted most profoundly was his understanding of karma itself. Karma wasn't a one-time lesson or a final destination. It was a continuous unfolding process, guiding him to evolve with each new experience. Rachel met him for one last session before they parted ways for a while. "You've come full circle," she said with a smile. "You've learned to embrace the flow of life, but you've also gathered lessons from every karmic number along the way." John nodded, thinking back to their discussions. "But there's still so much more to learn," he admitted. Rachel agreed. "That's the beauty of karma. It's always teaching, even when we don't realize it. Every karmic number has played a role in your journey, even those that didn't seem directly related to you." She paused, then added, "Take karmic number 2, for example. It's all about balance and harmony in relationships. You've learned that, haven't you? How to navigate the balance between your needs and those of others." John smiled. His relationships, particularly with his father, had been one of his most transformative experiences. "Yeah, I've realized it's not about avoiding conflict, but about finding harmony within it." Rachel nodded. "Exactly. And just like karmic number 2 teaches balance, karmic number 1 has taught you leadership. You've had to step into roles you didn't feel ready for, but you've learned that true leadership is about inspiring others, not just being in control." John thought about how his journey had forced him to lead, not just at work, but in his own life. He had learned to make decisions with confidence, even when the path wasn't clear. "It's funny," he said. "I used to think being a leader meant having all the answers, but now I know it's more about being able to move forward, even when you don't." Rachel leaned back, folding her arms thoughtfully. "And what about karmic number 4? The builder, the one who seeks stability and structure. You've had moments where you craved that too, right? The urge to create something solid in the midst of all the change." John nodded. "I've realized that even though my karmic number is about freedom, I still need some stability. I've had to find a way to create balance between security and flexibility." In those moments of reflection, John also saw how other karmic numbers had shaped his journey. "What about number 6, the nurturer?" he asked Rachel. "I've been so focused on my own growth, but I think I've also learned to care for others in a deeper way." Rachel smiled, impressed by his insight. "Absolutely. Number 6 is all about responsibility and care, but the challenge is learning to care for yourself while helping others. You found that balance, how to set boundaries while still being compassionate." John also remembered the lesson of karmic number 3, the energy of creativity and communication. "I've started to express myself more," he admitted. "Not just in work, but in my personal life too. I've learned that communication isn't just about talking, it's about truly connecting." "Exactly," Rachel replied. "And that's something people with karmic number 3 often struggle with. They're full of creative ideas, but they need to find the discipline to channel that energy into something meaningful." The more they talked, the more John realized how each karmic number had contributed to his evolution. Even karmic number 8, with its focus on power and success, had played a role. "I used to be so obsessed with achieving something concrete," John said. "But now I understand that real success isn't just about material achievements, it's about inner growth." Rachel agreed, adding one last thought. "And don't forget karmic number 9, the number of completion and universal love. You've learned to forgive, to let go of the past, and to find peace in the present." "That's a powerful transformation, John. You're no longer tied to old karmic patterns. You've set yourself free." As they wrapped up their conversation, John felt a deep sense of gratitude. The karmic numbers weren't just abstract concepts. They were real, living energies that had shaped his path. He had learned from them all, from the freedom of number 5 to the leadership of number 1 to the wisdom and introspection of karmic number 7. But most importantly, he had learned that the journey wasn't over. Karma would continue to guide him, offering new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities for growth. The more he embraced the cyclical nature of life, the more he realized that karma was not a burden, but a gift, a map to his soul's evolution. As John walked away from the meeting, the sun was setting, casting a golden light over the city. He smiled to himself, feeling lighter than he had in years. Life wasn't perfect. There were still uncertainties, challenges, and moments of doubt. But now he was ready for whatever came next. Because for the first time in his life, he truly understood that karma wasn't about control. It was about flowing with life, learning from every moment, and trusting that the universe had a plan. No matter what the future held, John knew one thing for sure. He was exactly where he needed to be. As the weeks passed, John felt a deep transformation within himself. His life, once filled with confusion, frustration, and an overwhelming sense of needing control, had shifted. Karma, which he once saw as an elusive force beyond his grasp, had become a companion on his journey, a guide, always present but never forceful. His heart was lighter and his mind was clearer. He no longer feared the unknown but welcomed it with open arms. One evening, John sat in quiet meditation. He reflected on everything he had learned over the past year. The lessons were not just in the challenges he faced, but in how he faced them. Karma had taught him that life wasn't about avoiding mistakes or controlling every outcome. It was about how you rise after each fall, how you choose to see opportunity in every setback, and how you flow with life rather than resist it. Rachel's words echoed in his mind. Karma is the dance of the soul, John. It's not about getting everything right. It's about learning, evolving, and moving forward with grace. He understood that now, in a way he never had before. His karmic number, 5, was a reflection of his deepest self. But as he had learned through Rachel's teachings, every karmic number had something to teach him. And each lesson was a piece of the puzzle that made up his life's path. He thought about the people who had crossed his path during this journey. His father, with whom he had finally found peace after years of tension. His colleagues at work, where he had learned to lead with both confidence and humility. And Rachel, who had guided him through the most profound transformation of his life. Every person, every situation, had been a part of his karmic story. But even as he sat there, feeling at peace, John knew that this was not the end. Karma was not a journey with a finish line. It was a constant cycle of growth and renewal, a never-ending process of becoming. "I'm not done," he whispered to himself. "I'm just beginning." This was the true power of karma, the realization that life is infinite and every moment offers the chance to evolve. In the quiet of that evening, John made a vow. He would no longer fear the unknown or resist the lessons that came his way. Instead, he would embrace them with open arms, knowing that every experience, whether joyous or painful, was a gift from the universe. He would continue to walk his karmic path, not with anxiety or trepidation, but with trust and courage. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything he had learned. The numbers, the teachings, the experiences, they had all come together to shape the man he was becoming. Karma wasn't something that happened to him. It was something that happened for him. And as he opened his eyes and looked out at the world, John understood something profound. The journey never ends. Life would continue to challenge him, to surprise him, to test him. But now, he knew how to respond, with grace, with patience, with love. He was no longer a prisoner to his past or a slave to the future. He was fully present, fully alive, and fully committed to the path ahead. And in that moment, as the sun set and the stars began to appear in the sky, John felt something he hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Because in the end, that's what karma is. Not a punishment, not a reward, but the freedom to grow, to change, and to become who you were always meant to be.